Should reflect that Mr. Holmes is present with his attorneys and the prosecutors are present as well. We are outside the presence of the jury, and Special Agent Gumbiner is outside the courtroom as well. That was correct. Thank you. All right, let's go through the juror questions now. First, I have the questions that I have marked on the form number 43, and there are multiple questions on the form. The first question is, can you describe the effects of napalm? Any objection from the people?
Well, I don't object, but I'm not sure that that's within his area of expertise, and it's not a particular question I asked him, so I'm not really sure that he knows the answer. But so I think that if you want to ask that question, I think it needs to be if you know.
Any objection from the defense if I ask if you know?
Yes, Your Honor, it's outside the area of expertise and outside of the disclosures given to the defense.
I will not ask it based on that. I will not ask the next question either, which is the same question with respect to thermite. I'm assuming it's the same objection, right?
Yes.
Mr. Orman?
Well, I can tell you he does know how thermite works and so I don't have any issue with that question. It's a question from the jury about the testimony, so I think that you can ask it.
Okay. Do you think it's within his area of expertise?
Yes, Your Honor.
And
we'll tell the court there's another witness that is our global explosives witness, Mr. Rogopoulos, who I think we're planning on calling later this week, who I would be asking similar questions to. So the court may want to know that.
All right, why don't we handle it that way then? So I'll sustain the defense's objection to that question as well. So I won't ask either one of those questions. The next question is, what are they used for? So that's a similar question. I'm assuming the same objection, Ms. Spengler?
That's correct.
And so I will sustain it, and you can cover it with your other witness. The next question is, as an expert, what is your definition of an incendiary device? Any objection?
Seems like it's a legally defined term in Colorado. We have a statutory definition of an incendiary explosive device. but I do not object to how he understands that term being used. And so that's how I understand the question, so I do not object.
Ms. Spengler, do you have any objection?
Yes, I object because we do have a legal definition. It would be confusing to the jury to hear his definition and then be provided with a different definition.
Well, he has used the term incendiary device, though, and so I think what's fair is to ask him what he means when he uses that term. What is that? What does that mean as he uses the term? I think it's fair for him to explain that. So any objection if I modify it that way, just to have him explain what he means by that term, because he has used that term several times today. And I think the jury wants to know, what do you mean by incendiary device? What does that mean to you?
No objection to the reform of the question.
All right, I'll ask it that way as modified. Okay, the next question is on the form that I have marked as number 44. If someone opened the door not knowing that there was a booby trap, would there have been an immediate explosion? Any objection?
No.
Any objection?
Yes, Your Honor. Calls for speculation.
I think it's within his area of expertise, and the cross-examination went into this area, the redirect examination went into that area as well, so I think it's a fair question. So the objection is overruled. I will ask that question. The next question on the same form is approximately how long would it have taken for the devices to explode or catch fire? Any objection?
None from the people.
From the defense?
Yes, Your Honor. It's outside of what's been disclosed to the defense as part of his expert opinion.
Again, it goes to his expertise. I don't think that this is something that is new or surprising or that hasn't been disclosed. And there was an area that was gone into the cross-examination that I think opens the door to that question as well. Next, I have the questions on form number 45. The first question is, how were their pictures taken from an elevated height? Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
Next is...
No objection from the defense.
Thank you. Do you know if the handguns on and in the car were loaded? Any objection?
No objection.
Ms. Spengler?
No objection.
Okay, those questions are going to be asked. Next I have, was the suspect looking at pictures or describing from memory? Any objection?
Your Honor, I think that is referring to during the conversation.
That's how I understood it.
I think that I don't object.
Ms. Spengler?
I don't understand the question.
Was the suspect looking at pictures or describing from memory? I think it's referring to the interview that was conducted by Special Agent Gumbiner and Detective Apple. And the question is, at the time of the interview, was the suspect looking at pictures or describing things from memory?
Or could rephrase the question to during the interview.
That's fine. I think that's fair.
I agree, Your Honor.
The next question is on the form that I have marked as number 47. Do you know if the contents of the bottles actually contained correctly explosive material? If it was tested other than the one destroyed? Any objection?
None for me, Your Honor.
Any objection?
Again, this is information that will come out through different witnesses in the future. So yes.
I'll ask him if he knows. I mean, he may. I think this would be within his knowledge, but I'll add if he knows. With that modification, I will ask the question. Next is the question on the form that I have marked as number 48. You said that Mr. Holmes acted similar to other bombing suspects that you have interviewed. What specifically was similar? What was different about his actions / responses? Before you take a position on this question, let me give you question 52 because they kind of go hand in hand. And maybe you disagree, but I see them as going hand in hand. Number 52 is it common for perpetrators to assist, like Mr. Holmes did, to clear a bomb site after the IEDs did not go off? So, back to 48. What is the people's position as to the question on 48? You said Mr. Holmes acted similar to other bombing suspects you have interviewed. What specifically was similar? What was different about his actions / responses?
I do not object.
And then what about 52?
I do not object.
All right. What's the defense's position with respect to 48 and 52?
Your Honor, we do object. We objected to the original question, and it now appears that there's profiling going on, and we continue to object to this line of questioning.
I don't think it's profiling. I think it's a question about what his observations were and whether there was anything unusual that he noticed. It doesn't go to, the question is not a specific question about was he acting abnormal or normal, which I have said in a previous order gets close to saying was he acting sane or insane, and I think that those questions would be improper. This is asking, was there anything unusual about your interview? And implicit in that question is, based on other interviews that you've conducted, was there anything unusual? Anything that you noticed that was similar to other interviews? Anything that you noticed that was different from other interviews? The only concern I have is it's a pretty small sample. I think it's only interviewed something like 6 people before, so I don't know, and I didn't know that when I ruled on the previous objection that was made, because that testimony came out later. I think in light of that, the more I think about this, I'm going to err on the side of caution, and I will sustain the defense's objection to both questions. So I will not ask either one of these questions. That should not be interpreted to mean that I think these questions are improper, but I think it just makes sense to err on the side of caution, especially given the sample being so small. Next question is on the form that I have marked as number 49. Did both and let me back up a moment. Let me just supplement the record on the last 2 questions. I think both sides have asked questions related to perhaps not precisely demeanor, but something along those lines. I mean, there were questions that the prosecution has elicited in terms of the officer who made the traffic stop in Winter Park and the defendant's demeanor at that time. There were no objections to those types of questions. The defense has also elicited testimony related to the voicemail on the defendant's cell phone, the voicemail, the answer on the voicemail, the recording that he had on his voicemail, and whether that was unusual or not. And so there has been testimony along these lines by both sides, but again, I'm going to err on the side of caution and not ask those last 2 questions. The question on form number 49. did both detonating remotes need to have line of sight to set off the explosives? Specifically, had someone pushed the detonator on the RC car, would it have set off an explosion? Is there an objection from the people?
I think that if it's prefaced by "if you know," I don't object.
All right. Any objection from the defense with that modification?
If I may have a moment, Judge.
Yes.
Your Honor, we do object. This is information that will come out or will be better suited for an upcoming witness.
He testified about some of this, didn't he?
Did, Your Honor, and I think a large amount of it was on cross-examination, which is why I don't object to it. Because I think that the defense brought this up, which is why I think it's proper for the jury to inquire in this area.
I will ask the question, but I will say if you know. The next question I have is on the form that I have marked as number 50. In your expert opinion, did any of the explosive/incendiary contraptions appear in any way to be just for show or designed to intimidate rather than to go off? Any objections?
I don't object, Your Honor, and the reason I don't object is because I think the questions asked on cross-examination open the door to this area of inquiry, and I think it is an appropriate question.
Any objection?
Yes, Your Honor. It calls for speculation, foundation, Rule 16.
It's asking about what it appears to him. I will warn him not to speculate, but to talk about his observations. I think it's a fair question given the cross-examination and the redirect examination. And I think it's within his area of expertise. Next, on the same form, conversely, were there any devices/contraptions that were not immediately visible that posed a significant threat or danger? Any objection?
I don't object, Your Honor.
Any objection?
No objection.
The next question is on the form I have marked as number 51. The question is, why did you refuse to speak with the defense team? Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
Any objection?
No.
Okay, without objection, I will ask it. And then 52 we've talked about. The question on form 52, I will not ask it based on the record we made. Those are all the questions. I shouldn't say all the questions. Those are the questions that the jury has submitted. Before we bring the jury in, I have indicated before the rule that we've been using in terms of providing any exhibits to the media that have been admitted. And what I indicated is that if there were any exhibits that had written material on them, that those would be provided to the media because they're not visible on the screen that the CCTV camera captures. And so that's what we've been doing. The transcript that was just introduced has written material on it. It's an exhibit that has been admitted, but it wasn't shown on the screen, so it's a little different than the other materials that my earlier ruling applies to. However, as everyone knows, the audio recording was very difficult to understand. So, do the people have a position with respect to that transcript?
I don't have a position, but I would note, Your Honor, they could also be provided with the audio recording, which might be easier to understand if it wasn't broadcast through the courtroom. But I don't take a position.
Okay, does the defense have a position? Ms. Nelson?
We object, Your Honor. It wasn't published. The transcript wasn't published on any of these screens, and there's no indication that media or anyone watching from, well, there's been no request. So that's the reason we object, number one. But number two, there's no indication that it's any easier or more difficult to hear than what observers overheard live in the courtroom.
Do you have any concerns with the court providing it? Other than the ones you've stated before.
Concerns with the court providing the transcript?
Right.
We object. It's not appropriate to provide the media with an exhibit that wasn't published in open court.
Well, it was published in open court. I mean, the audio was published. The transcript was not shown on the screen, but the audio is of poor quality. The request that was made earlier, a couple of weeks ago, maybe it was a week ago, included all the exhibits that were admitted in court, and I think that were shown in court, published in court. This is a little bit different. I'll have to go back and look at that motion and see if it includes this. I'm just, because of my ruling, I wanted to bring it up to the parties. I'll go back and check on the motion that was filed. I don't know whether the motion was limited to what is shown on the camera. If it is, then this would not come within the scope of that. But so we'll do it that way. I'll go back and look at the motion that was filed and my ruling, and then we'll go from there.
Will the court notify the parties before publishing to the media?
I will tell you if I decide. I will tell you if I decide to publish it. Frankly, I'm inclined to. I don't know what the concern is, but to the extent that there hasn't been a request made, then I won't do it, and I will tell you before I make a final decision on that. So, okay, let's bring the jury in, please. Yes, please. Please be seated, everyone. The record should reflect that the jury has joined us again. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a good lunch. All right. As you know, at the end of the morning session, there were some questions that you had submitted for Special Agent Gumbiner, and Special Agent Gumbiner is now back on the witness stand. I will remind you that you're still under oath, okay? Yes, sir. All right, Special Agent, there are some questions that the jury has submitted. Some of them I have found to be appropriate under the rules of evidence and other applicable rules of law. So I'm going to ask those questions now. The first question is, as an expert, what is your definition, or excuse me, as an expert, what do you mean when you say incendiary device?
When we talk about an incendiary device, you're taking a mixture that will not explode, but will catch fire, and it will burn. Instead of getting an explosion, such as an improvised explosive device, you will get an explosion, say a pipe bomb, for example. The other example is if you don't get the explosion, the two ingredients, an energetic material, which are a fuel and an oxidizer, and the oxidizer provides the oxygen for that explosive, it will burn or be an incendiary device. So you won't get the explosion, it will just continue to burn until all of the ingredients have consumed itself.
The next question is, if someone opened the door not knowing that there was a booby trap, would there have been an immediate explosion?
I don't think there would have been. If they opened the door would not have hit the tripwire. It would take somebody to enter that apartment in order for that booby trap to initiate.
Next question. Approximately how long would it have taken for the devices to explode or catch fire?
It would have been instantaneous. As soon as that tripwire would have been initiated, any spark that would hit the floor, the whole apartment would have exploded.
The next question is, how were these pictures taken from an elevated height?
From the doorway, or from the theater?
It doesn't specify. It just says how were these pictures taken from an elevated height?
So at the theater, the pictures of the vehicle were taken, I believe, from our evidence response team, from the elevated area. From the apartment, we took pictures from the doorway utilizing not only screenshots from the robot, but also a long-range camera that we had in the hallway.
Do you know if the handguns on and in the car were loaded?
That I do not know.
The next question. During the interview, was the suspect looking at pictures or describing from memory?
From memory.
The next question. Do you know if the contents of the bottles actually contain correctly explosive material if it was tested other than the one destroyed? Again, only if you know.
So the Sprite bottles had gasoline in them. I actually pulled them out of the apartment, and you could certainly smell that it was gasoline. The firework balls had smokeless powder in them because we could see that when we entered the apartment.
Did both detonating remotes need to have a line of sight to set off the explosives? Specifically, had someone pushed the detonator on the RC car, would it have set off an explosion? Again, only if you know.
So the launch control system that was located inside his apartment with the remote control that was left by his plant, we believe that that was not armed, and if anybody would hit the button, nothing would happen. The pyrotechnic firing box that was located in the kitchen above the refrigerator, the defendant placed the remote control of that outside by the dumpster by the remote control car. It's my belief that if somebody would have found that remote and that RC car and tried to play with the car utilizing that remote, it would have set the apartment off and it would have exploded.
The next question. In your expert opinion, did any of the explosive/incendiary contraptions appear in any way to be just for show or designed to intimidate rather than to go off? Do not speculate as you answer this question. Answer it only based on your expertise and any observations that you made.
They were designed to kill or maim anybody that was inside that apartment when they initiated.
Conversely, were there any devices/contraptions that were not immediately visible that posed a significant threat or danger?
No, most of the devices were located inside his living room.
Next question. Why did you refuse to speak with the defense team?
It's my decision whether or not to speak to the defense team. And as an FBI agent, when we get done with an interview, with investigative duties, we write reports, and we stand by those reports. And that's what was my decision, to stand by the reports that I wrote right after this incident. And I did not want to meet and be re-interviewed regarding my actions on those days, quite a few days afterwards, where I could possibly say something that was incorrect or say something that was not in my reports.
Any follow-up questions based on those questions, Mr. Orman?
Thank you, Your Honor.
Ms. Spengler, may this witness be released from his subpoena?
Your Honor, I'd like to keep him under subpoena. I doubt very much I'll need to use that, but I would like to keep him under subpoena.
Okay. Sir, you are subject to recall by the prosecution. I don't know whether you've been subpoenaed by the defense, but if you have, then they can call you as well. So you're relieved or released for now, but you may be called again. Thank you. All right, thank you. Call your next witness, please. Miss Stitch McGuire.
Maria Carbonell.
Good afternoon. Can I have you raise your right hand for me so I can administer an oath? Do you solemnly swear or affirm on a penalty of law that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please be seated. Why don't you hand me all these pictures? Transcript.
Oh, okay.
Ryan, you want these,
Yes, sir.
Yes. Okay, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Actually, I think I may proceed. Could you please tell us your full name and spell your first and last name?
My name is Maria Angela Carbonell.
Can you spell your first, middle, and last names?
MariaAngela
All right, you may proceed, Mr. Schmaguire.
Thank you. Were you at the Century 16 movie theater on July 19th of 2012 in Aurora, Colorado?
Yes, I was.
Did that go into the early morning hours of July 20th of 2012?
Yes, it did.
Why were you going to that movie theater that day?
That day, myself and my two children.
I'm going to ask you to speak in the microphone a little bit more.
Like this. Is this better? Okay. I was going there to meet my friends from Red Robin, and I brought my two children with me, and we were there to see The Dark Knight Rises.
Was there a special occasion that you were going to the movie that night?
Yeah, it was. Well, the movie itself was a special occasion, but it was also Alex Sullivan's birthday.
Now, what time did you get to the movie theater that night?
Myself and my children, we arrived fairly early. I want to say maybe around 6:37. We were kind of tailgating, I guess. There we met Alex, and I'm going to refer to him as Sully because that was how we call him. So Sully, Annalise Armando, and myself, we were there, as well as Edgar, Chris, and Jasmine. We were all just kind of hanging out, waiting in line. We were playing Uno. They were watching, I believe, one of the Batman movies or another show on my friend Edgar's laptop. We ate really bad nachos, my daughter and I, and we were just having fun. We waited there until we were allowed to go into the theater.
How old are your children at the time?
Ma'am, I'm going to ask you to move that microphone. You're very soft-spoken.
Like this?
So speak right into it, please.
Like, is this okay like this?
That's better.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry. What did you say?
How old were your children at the time?
My son Armando was 12, and my daughter Annalise was 15.
At some point in time, did you guys have an opportunity to get into the movie theater?
Yes. And we were there. We were having a really just fun time. It was the first time that Annalise and Armando met Sully, and it was really great because Sully, he gave my son a Dark Knight Rises hat and a keychain, and it was the first time that Sully had ever met my son, and my son thought he was just so happy and was just so shocked. And it was really cool because the two of them talked about comics, and I was really happy that the two of them were able to meet because they both love comics so much, and it was nice. And we found really great seeds, and it was funny. My kids were fighting over my son's Slurpee. We were having like a lot of fun.
At some point in time, did the movie start?
Yes.
What happened during your movie?
So, I was watching the movie, and I was really into the scene, and I saw the exit door open, and at first I thought, how rude. I thought maybe it was an employee or something coming in, and I didn't really pay attention, and I heard someone yell, "You," profanity. I'm not going to say it, and I was like, wow, what a jerk. And then I remember hearing like it sounded like a tear gas, like a t-shirt gun, and I remember hearing that, and I thought, just maybe they're shooting out t-shirts. But then I heard this clank, and when I remember hearing the clank, and my son, he jumped up and he yelled, "Stink bomb!" And I grabbed him by the back of his pants and I yanked him down. And I then grabbed my friend Jasmine Kennedy that was sitting right next to me, and I told her, "Jasmine, get down." And I remember just hearing like boom, 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 and then looking, because my son was sitting to the left of me, and my friend Jasmine and Chris and Edgar and Sully and everyone was sitting to the right. And I remember looking down at my son, and I was watching this smoke billow out from underneath the chairs. And right away I started to panic because I was thinking, oh no, Armando doesn't have an inhaler on him, and he's going to have an asthma attack. And I grabbed my coat that I had, and I put it over my nose so that I could breathe. And I remember like not being able to breathe and my eyes burning. And I remember looking at Armando and Annalise, and I could see that Armando had his t-shirt covered over his mouth like this, and I could see my daughter. She was huddled next to him, but all I could see was her legs in the back of her. And things just kind of got really quiet for me.
What's the next thing you remember?
I remember having my arms around Jasmine, and I had my hands on Armando's pants still. I didn't let go of them. And I had my arms around Jasmine, and I was rubbing her back and telling her that it was okay. And she was really upset, and she was like, "Marie, I don't know what to do. I've never been in anything like this before." And I was just like, "Jasmine, you just have to calm down. You have to calm down." And at some point, I remember feeling like a sting go across my thigh, and hearing like little beads like bouncing all around me. And I remember Jasmine letting out this screech and screaming for her mom.
Overruled?
And I was just telling her, I was like, "You have to calm down." And I kept telling myself that somebody's going to stop this. Like, this is going to stop. And when it wasn't stopping, I started thinking to myself, how am I going to get the two of them to be quiet so that we could play dead? And I remember hearing people say, "Run." And I looked down the aisle, and I already seen that Bryson and Tony and Annalise were going. And so I got up and I calmly grabbed my purse from underneath the seat, and I grabbed my son's hand, and we started walking towards the left aisle. And at some point, I lost Armando's hand. He kind of just went. And I got towards the end of the aisle, and I stepped down that first step, and I looked back, and I was yelling for Jasmine to run. And I was just screaming. I was like, "Run, Jasmine, run." And I looked, and I saw her holding her legs, and I couldn't understand why she wasn't going. And so I turned around, and I turned around and I looked down, and I see these hands, and they're waving up at me
like in a motion like this. And I grab the person's hands and I lock them. And I pull the person, and I think it was a male, because when I put my hand on his shoulder, it felt like strong. And I pulled him in between the seats, and I bent down, and I said, "Are you okay?" And then I looked up, and I didn't see my kids, and I panicked. And then I went to get up. I saw a woman laying there on the steps, and she appeared to be deceased with some head trauma. And so I hopped over. I had to step over her, and I kind of stopped for a minute, and I kind of looked, because I was still not really sure what was going on. And I remember seeing like the reflection of the blood against the movie on the rail. You know how there's steps that go up, and there's the rail seating. I can remember seeing the reflection of the blood shining off of that, and people and arms and yelling. And when I kind of did, I scanned down, I could see people on the floor seats. They were looking up from underneath their seats at me. And I remember just thinking, okay, you know, where's the kids? And then I looked to go down, and I see a male that appeared to be deceased at the bottom of the stairs, and I jumped over him, and I proceeded to go out the left exit out to the lobby. And when I left the lobby doors, I looked around, and I saw people that they were just standing there, and I didn't understand, and I was just screaming at them to run. And I remember running out the lobby doors, and I was screaming. I was like, "Armando, Anna." And I see Annalise, she's standing there right in front of the doors next to a tree. And she's like, "Mom, Mom." And then I start screaming for Armando, and he comes running out from the right side. There was like a brick partition wall. He come running from behind there. And so we get together, and as we're going out to the parking lot, I see Tony and Bryson Bellapondo, and Bryson's like, "Hey, we're going to the hospital."
And here's the confrontation.
I'm
Sustained.
okay.
All right, Ms. Carbonell, I'm going to stop you right
fine.
here. Now, did you have to seek any medical attention for yourself?
Yes, I did.
What was that for?
In the theater, I was grazed by something, and when I was running out of the theater, I had lost my shoes, and I had a puncture in the bottom of my foot from a stick.
Right, and where were you? Did you go somewhere to seek your medical attention?
Yes, I went to University Hospital.
Right. Your Honor, if I may approach the witness with what's been marked as People's Exhibit 2550, 2549, 1117, and 4678.
Yes.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Carbonell, could you please look at 2550?
Yes.
Right, do you recognize the person in that photograph?
Yes, I do.
Who is it?
That is me.
All right, and does that fairly and accurately represent what you looked like on July 20th of 2012?
Yes.
And does that photograph depict any of your injuries?
This one, 2550. No, but the next one does.
And is that 2549?
Yes.
And what does that photograph depict?
It is the picture of my graze as well as my legs covered in blood.
All right. And does that fairly and accurately depict your injuries on July 20th of 2012?
Yes.
Now, if you could please look at diagram 1117.
Yes.
All right. Do you recognize that diagram?
Wait 1 minute. Yes.
All right. And is that a diagram that you drew of where you were seated at the theater and things you observed?
Yes.
All right. And does that fairly and accurately depict what you believe, where you believe you sat in the theater on July 20th of 2012?
Yes.
And do you recognize 4678?
Same diagram?
Oh, sorry. The next exhibit, 4678.
Yes.
All right. And what is that?
That is a picture of Alex Sullivan.
This time I would move for the admission of People's Exhibits 2550, 2549, 1117, and 4678.
Has 4678 been admitted before?
Yes, Your Honor. Sorry, I just moved to publish that one.
All right. Is there any objection to the admission of 2549, 2550, and 1117? And that would be P-DR, 2549, 2550, and 1117. Ms. Spengler?
Sorry, I lost the numbers. I can tell.
Could you show the pictures to her again, please,
and I
so
did,
that she understands which ones you're moving to admit?
Object to the publication of 4678. It's cumulative. It's already been published to the jury. We would object to 2550, as that is the photograph that the witness said did not depict her injuries that night.
We do not object to the other two.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. Your objection on 2550, I couldn't hear you.
She indicated that the picture did not depict her injuries that evening.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Hold on, give me just a second. I'll sustain the objection as to 2550, but I'll let you establish more foundation if you want, Mr. McGuire.
Thank you, Your Honor.
2549 is admitted and may be published, and 117 is admitted and may be published. 4678 has been published before. So the objection to publishing that one again is sustained. You may proceed on 2550, P-DR-2550. Go ahead.
Thank you. Ms. Carbonell, I'm going to approach you with this photograph again. Now, looking at this photograph more carefully, if you look at the bottom of your legs, are the injuries of your legs visible in that photograph?
Yes, one is just more of a close-up.
So, People's Exhibit 2549 is just a close-up that depicts the injuries on your legs, but that's also visible in 2550.
Yes.
But 2550, you can tell that that's actually you.
Yes, it is me.
And the other picture is just a picture of a leg.
Well, it's still me.
Two legs, but still you.
Yes.
Okay. Your Honor, at this time I would move for the admission of People's Exhibits 2550.
Any objection based on that additional foundation?
No objection.
Without objection, P-DR-2550 is admitted and may be published.
May I please have 2550? And is that the photograph that depicts you on the night of July 20th of 2012?
Yes.
May I please have 2549? Is that a close-up of the injuries on your leg on July 20th of 2012?
Yes.
May I please have People's Exhibit 1117? All right, and Ms. Carbonell, there's a microphone up there. If I could, behind you, if I could ask you to turn it on, please. And there is a big stick behind you. If you can use that, thank you. And if you could just show the jury where you were seated in the theater, please.
Sorry. So I was seated right here. And my son Armando was seated here, and my daughter Annalise was seated here.
And how did you exit the theater?
I exited down the left aisle.
All right, and what is that red thing that depicts close to row 10?
This one right here. That is where I helped the individual up and pulled them in between the seats.
Right, and then down at the bottom where there's a C, what does that depict?
That depicts the gentleman that I thought that was deceased.
Okay. Thank you very much. You can have a seat. I have no further questions for this witness. Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, would counsel please approach? Spengler, any cross-examination?
No.
And there do not appear to be any questions from the jury. So may this witness be released from her subpoena?
Yes, thank you, Your Honor.
Is there any objection, Ms. Spengler? All right, thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Call your next witness, please.
People call Kumar J.R. Allen.
Can I have you raise your right hand? Solemnly swear or penalty of law that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
Please be seated. Please tell us your full name and spell your first, middle, and last names.
My full name is Sukumar Vijayaraghavan, and the first name is spelled Sukumar, and the last name is Vijayaraghavan.
So just as it sounds. Just as it sounds. All right, Mr. Bracco, you may proceed.
Sir, would you please tell us what you do for a living?
I am a professor at the Department of Physiology and the director of the Neuroscience graduate program at the University of Colorado Anschutz Medical Center.
Here's what I'm going to ask of you, sir. If you would pull that microphone up even just a little bit closer. You're a little soft.
Okay. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's great. Hey, here's what I want to do now that you've identified yourself as the director of that neuroscience program. I want to step back and ask you about you and your credentials and qualifications that led you to that job. Then I want to talk to you about the program itself that the defendant went through between 2011 and 2012. And then I want to talk to you about the defendant, okay?
Okay.
First off, let's talk a little bit about you. How does someone become a professor of, did you say physiology?
Yes.
How did you become that?
Well, I got my PhD in biochemistry. Then I did a few years of postdoctoral training at the University of California at San Diego. And then I joined the Department of Physiology here as an assistant professor and rose up the ranks to be a professor as I am today.
Okay, and again, I'm going to ask you to just keep your voice up as much as you can, just so everyone can hear you. Now, okay. I detect a bit of an accent. Are you from Texas?
Yeah, Minnesota.
Now, when you're a professor of physiology with that PhD, how do you work your way into neuroscience?
Well, my topic of research is examining how cells in the brain signal to each other and how that signaling can be modified by drugs of abuse like nicotine. and that makes me a bona fide neuroscientist.
Maybe it's worth a description of what is neuroscience.
Okay, so the neuroscience in general is the study of how the nervous system works, how the brain is put together, how it develops, how it signals, and how do information from outside world gets processed in the brain, and by what mechanisms do they get processed, and how it applies to various diseases and disorders of the brain.
Is that multidisciplinary in its approach?
It is very multidisciplinary in its approach.
Now, I use that word because you used that word with me earlier. Would you tell us, what does that mean, multidisciplinary?
It means it involves skills from a number of disciplines ranging from physics, chemistry, pharmacology, physiology, and cell biology, and brain imaging, and so on.
At the University of Colorado, at that Anschutz campus just up the road from us here, do they have a program for neuroscience?
Yes, they do have a graduate program for neuroscience.
Now, is that different than having, say, a school of neuroscience?
Well, it is different in the sense that we don't have an undergraduate degree in neuroscience. So most students who come into the neuroscience program have finished their graduate and have the undergraduate degree, and then come in for a PhD into the program.
Now, you've said you're the director of the neuroscience program currently. Were you the director back when the defendant was part of that program?
No, I was the chair of the graduate training committee at that point.
Tell us what the graduate training committee is.
The graduate training committee consists of 5 members of the faculty who are in charge of monitoring student progress, how they do, helping them make decisions during their PhD tenure, and facilitating their path towards a successful completion of their degree.
When you were in that role, did you have responsibilities regarding the recruiting of that next class of PhD candidates?
I didn't. I was part of the admissions committee as a member of the graduate training committee. So the admissions committee is a separate committee that consists of other faculty members who screen applications, decide who to invite for interview, conduct interviews, and so on. And I was part of that committee.
Now, this particular program at the University of Colorado, are there many like it in the United States?
I think there are many neuroscience programs, yes.
Where does this one rank, the one that you're a part of?
It's hard to know how one ranks these programs, but one ranking would be by the award of these training grants. There are 28 in this country, and we are one of them.
Okay. Is it a competitive process to become a PhD candidate?
Yes, it is. To enter the program, we get about 70, 75 applications for a class of 6 or 5 or 6.
Now, in this particular process that you're going to describe for us, is this how you go from 75 applicants down to the 6 that you chose back in the 2011-2012 class? Tell us how that worked.
So it's a national application process. People apply to the program, and the admissions committee screens all the applications, and the applications contain the following information. One, their credentials, where they did their undergrad, their GPAs, their GRE scores. Then they have a statement of purpose where the candidate describes why they want to do research and why they want to be in the program. And then there are letters of references from people they have worked with in the past. And we also look for people who have had some research experience so that they know what they're getting into. And based on all these criteria, we narrow that process down to about 12 to 13 people we invite for interviews. And this interview consists of,
I'm sorry to stop you. There's a couple things I wanted to back up with you, and then we'll pick up right from there. Okay. One of them was, you mentioned a GRE. Not everyone may know what that is. What's the GRE?
It's a graduate record exam. It's an exam that all students, in fact, most, if not all, graduate programs, PhD programs require GRE. So it's a national exam conducted by the ETS, or the Educational Testing Service, and the students are graded on their verbal, quantitative, and analytical skills, and they are ranked in percentiles, with the 99th percentile, meaning that most people are below, you are at the 99th percent or higher.
Also, you mentioned letters of reference. Prior to making the decision to offer someone admission into this program, do you follow up on those letters of reference and call people, or do you go just off of the documentary application that you receive?
It is both. So very often the letters are straightforward enough that we take them at face value. Sometimes we do call back and get some clarifications.
Now, to whittle this group down from approximately 75 down to 13, what caliber of applicants are you getting?
Could you be more specific as to what you want me to say?
And I don't know the answer to this, but are you getting people who have an undergraduate degree in music applying to neuroscience? Does that happen? I don't know.
There are probably not music, but we do have undergrads who finished their degree in physics. We do have people who've done. We've had one student from the Colorado School of Mines with engineering backgrounds. We have people who might have a psychology background, and people who have molecular biology or cell biology backgrounds.
It sounds like it's pretty diverse, like science or science and math.
Yes, and we really look at their performance in science in general when we make these decisions.
So you've whittled it down now to 13. What are you using to make the decision that 14th person or that 50th person isn't getting there? Is it just straight GRE score?
No, this is a combination of all the criteria that I mentioned. So it's a mixture of what we overall idea of whether we feel so and so would be good at a career in research or not.
So you have these 12 or 13 folks, and you said you invite them out for interviews?
Yes.
What time of year do you do that?
This is usually in February.
Of the year before they're going to start?
Of the year that they're going to start. They start in fall. That's in August, September, and the interviews happen in February.
All right, now, we're going to keep talking about this process, but I want to incorporate in the defendant in this case. Now, back in 2011, did someone named James Egan Holmes apply to your program?
Yes.
And did he make it through that initial cut to get down to the interview process?
Yes.
This guy's sitting over here at the table in this light green, I think it's a light green shirt, right here with the glasses and the mustache and the beard. Is that who you know to be James Holmes?
Yes.
That particular individual got invited out for an interview?
Yes.
Were you part of that process?
Yes.
Tell us about how that process works in general, and then we'll talk about how it worked with the defendant.
Okay. So in general, this is a process that is sort of coordinated with all graduate programs on campus. So for all programs, the people who have been invited for interviews are brought in. They are housed at a hotel. Usually it's the Renaissance at the Stapleton, and then they're here for 2 days. The first day begins with a morning where they would come into the program office, and the director of the program presents the program to them, gives them information about the program, what's good about it, why they should be interested in our program, and then they go through about 6 or 7 individual interviews with faculty, each of which last about 30 to 35 minutes.
Back in February of 2011, did the defendant go through that process?
Yes.
Were you one of the interviews that he did?
Yes.
Tell us about your observations of him in that interview.
I rated him quite highly. So the rating is from a score of 1 to 5, 1 being the best and 5 being the worst. And I think I rated him at about 1.5 or 2. He appeared to be extremely quiet, very reserved, but as I talked to him more and more about his science as well as my science, I was quite impressed by the fact that he understood what my project was about, asked some good questions, and my overall impression was that he was quiet and a little socially awkward, but definitely somebody who had the caliber to be in the program.
Now, before you interviewed him, you had the opportunity to look at his application, including the letters of reference, the GRE, the GPA from undergrad, and all that stuff. True?
Yes.
How did he rate on paper?
I think on paper he was among the top of our pool of interviewees.
Now, in terms of that interaction with you and the other professors with whom he interviewed, did he rate as highly in person as he did on paper?
Probably not. But I think the common concerns that was echoed through all the interviews was that he was sort of withdrawn, not very interactive, and hard to get a sense of.
Now, look, in the course of your time doing this, making these selections, how many people like the defendant do you think that you have interviewed through this process?
Well, totally I've interviewed maybe a few hundred students. Yeah.
And these several hundred students are all applying to be scientists?
Yes.
Where would you put the defendant in sort of that, what you've described as socially, I can't remember the word you used, limited, or what was the word you used? Awkward. Socially awkward. Where would you put him in that group?
I would put him at one end of the group with people who are socially awkward and who are more introverted and not very communicative, but along with a few of the people I've interviewed, yes.
You've seen other people as introverted and socially awkward as the defendant?
Yes.
And they've gone on to be good scientists?
Yes.
Is there anything about being a good scientist that requires you to not be introverted?
You mean in a career of a scientist?
At this entry-level stage.
At this entry-level stage, I think communication skills are important, but not necessarily in a social context. The ability to stand up and present your work, for example. I mean, those are skills that are important to succeed at this stage.
Now, in addition to the interviews with these 6 or 7 different professors, were there other opportunities for the defendant and other PhD would-be candidates to interact with other students?
Yes, so as I was saying, so on the day of the interview, each incoming interviewee is assigned a student from the program, and at the end of the interviews, the students host events, social events, where they get to know and get to interact with the candidates, and there's also an event where they're taken around the city to show what the city looks like and where living opportunities and so on, and all that is done by the students, so they do get a lot of opportunities to interact with students.
Based on everything that you go through in this process with the defendant, is he ultimately offered a spot in this neuroscience program?
Yes.
How many others were offered a spot in 2011?
Maybe about 10. I'm not very sure it's the exact number.
Could be as little as 6?
I think we make more offers than how many accepted.
Thank you.
So there are about 6 who accepted.
Okay, thank you. And all of those people competitive candidates?
Yes.
Great grades?
Yes.
Good GRE scores?
Yes.
Good interviews?
Yes.
Okay. This offer gets made to the defendant when? At what point in the year?
The offers are made usually within a week of the interviews, so in February itself.
You said the program starts in the fall, typically August?
Yes.
Now, was there an opportunity for the defendant to come out earlier that year and already start participating in a lab?
That is an opportunity that students have, but that is something that's arranged with particular labs and not necessarily as a program activity.
Okay. And is that something that the defendant availed himself of back in 2011?
I think he did.
Yeah, coming out to a lab in June with Professor Klug. Does that sound right?
Right.
Now, before we start talking about the lab and how it all fits together, I want you to describe for us this particular program that the defendant is entering into that's going to last him from August to approximately June of 2012, okay? Is it all just classroom work?
It's not all classroom work, but there is a lot of classroom work, but there is also opportunities for the students to go through different labs during the course of the first year, where they get to do research in these labs for periods of 11 to 12 weeks, and where the mentor in the lab and the student can sort of explore a particular area, figure out what they're interested in, figure out whether they would be a good fit, and the student gets to decide which of these labs would be a good fit to do his thesis on.
Is it fair to describe this program as having the classroom component and the laboratory component?
Yes.
And they're not necessarily even completely matched in terms of when they start and stop?
Yeah, they're not matched.
Okay. There are grades given for all of these things?
Yes.
Now, for the labs, how many credits do you get for a lab in figuring out your GPA?
You get each of these lab rotations are 1 credit.
But it's way more important than that, isn't it?
Yes, it is, because it helps the student to actually make a decision on what they're going to be doing research on.
Now, you've described 3 labs that every student has the opportunity to go through, and we'll talk about when they occurred during the year. But once you get past that first year, how do you go on to get your PhD? How do you go on to become a doctor?
So at the end of the first year, you rotated through 3 labs and you finished your coursework. You do a preliminary exam, which qualifies you to go into the second year and continue the program. And at that same time, they make a decision based on the labs they've rotated, which lab they'd like to do their thesis in. And upon agreement, mutual agreement of the mentor and the student enters that lab around July at the end of the first year. And once he enters the lab, they go through a period of about a year and a half, where they're developing research projects. At the end of that period, they have to take this exam called the comprehensive exam, where they have a committee of scientists who they choose to be their advisors, and they present to the whole program their thesis project and what they plan to do. And then they have a closed-door exam with their committee for about a couple of hours, where they are tested on how much they know, how much they've thought about, what their reasoning skills are, and at the end of it, if they pass the comprehensive exams, then they get to advance to candidacy. That's when they become a candidate for PhD. And then they continue working on their projects based on the proposal that they made, and takes another maybe 2.5 years of work, at which point, if the committee, the advisor, and the student are all agree upon it, then they decide on a date where the thesis can be defended, and the student then writes up a thesis, which is a compilation of all the research that he did, and they're supposed to publish papers in the interim, and then they present their whole thesis to the whole program, and then the committee meets and decides whether or not to award them the degree.
I feel like I just got the PhD. Thank you. the thing I want to get back to is this. If you as a student, if you can't find a lab that you want to do, or a lab that wants to bring you on board, that keeps you from progressing through the rest of the program?
Yes.
So these 3 labs are pretty critical.
Yes.
The preliminary examination that you talked about that takes place at the end of the year, if you cannot get passing marks through that preliminary examination, you can't progress through the rest of the program?
Objection leading.
It's a follow-up, so I'll allow it. It's just overruled.
Go ahead, sir.
If a student does not pass the prelims, usually the committee that examines him meets and decides whether to give him further opportunity to repeat it or repeat parts of it, or to take remedial actions like taking extra courses in the second year. So it's not the be-all and end-all.
Okay, not like the rotation part.
Not like not finding a lab. Yeah, you're right.
Okay. All right. For the defendant, back in 2011, 2012, every student is assigned a mentor?
Objection leading.
It was foundational, overruled.
Is that yes, sir?
Yes.
And who was the defendant's mentor during 2011 and 2012?
That was me.
Now, because you're his mentor, did you have increased contact with him versus other members of the admissions committee or the training committee?
Once he got here, probably yes.
How often would you meet with him?
I would say we met on average maybe once a month.
What was the purpose of your mentor relationship with the defendant?
The purpose of the first year mentor is to make sure that the student is progressing and is on track, and try to identify any potential weaknesses and see if we can ameliorate those weaknesses.
Now, in this first lab, do you remember who the defendant had as his lab professor?
That was Professor Kim Klu.
Now, I've seen the initials PI associated with each of these labs. What is a PI?
A PI just stands for the principal investigator. That's the person who runs the lab and in whose name, who gets grant funded too.
Okay, now we're going to hear from Professor Klug in a bit, but during the course of that lab and towards its end, did you receive feedback on the defendant's performance?
Yes.
And based on the feedback that you received, did you speak with the defendant about things he could do to improve?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
I think the feedback from the first rotation was again a question of not being engaged, not being interactive, and not getting as much done as one could. And those were things that I think we did discuss and say that needs to be improved.
Now, did you interpret that to be something that is an intellectual limitation or an effort-based limitation?
At that point, probably an effort-based limitation.
Okay. And is there a lot of social aspect to the laboratory portion of this program?
Could you repeat that, please?
Is there a social aspect of this laboratory part of the program?
Usually there is, because you spend a lot of time with the people who are already in the lab, and so there's a lot of interactions, both scientific as well as non-scientific.
Is there a presentation at the conclusion of each one of these 3 labs?
Yes, so there are what are known as rotation talks, where the students come and present what they did during that period of rotation to the faculty in the program at large.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness with what's been marked as People's Exhibit 1195?
Yes.
Hey, sir, I'm handing you this aforementioned People's Exhibit 1195. Do you recognize what that is?
Yes.
Tell us what that is.
So this is an online evaluation sheet that was filled in by me after the first rotation.
And is this an evaluation that you did of the defendant after his presentation that we just described?
Yes.
Do you remember whenabouts that would have taken place?
This could have been within a week or so after the rotation talks, which would have been in November, sometime in November
of 2011.
2011.
Now, for this presentation talk, where is it given?
It's given in the seminar room of the program.
Who all attends?
All the faculty and the students attend this.
How many people is that?
I would say on any day at least about 50 to 60 people.
50 to 60 people? A lot of them that we call doctors?
Yeah.
Okay. In these presentations, is there use of PowerPoint?
Yes.
And did the defendant develop a PowerPoint that you recall for this?
Yes.
How long is the talk given?
The talk is usually 15 to 20 minutes.
And during the talk, does the student or candidate field questions from the crowd, or are they just simply being critiqued afterwards?
No, they do feel that at the end of the talk, they field questions from the audience.
So you got to be on your game for this.
Yes.
All right. Pretty daunting.
Yes.
So in this particular case, you had the opportunity to evaluate the defendant on his first rotation presentation, and that document right there, 1195, does that accurately reflect the evaluation that you gave him back in November of 2011?
Yes.
Doesn't look like anybody's added or taken away anything from it?
No.
I'm going to move for the admission of 1195 into evidence.
Is there any objection to the admission of P-TR 1195?
No objection.
Without objection, P-TR-1195 is admitted and may be published.
Now, before we even think about putting this up, now I had put up some of this in opening statement, and there was a green and yellow and red boxes on this. Can you talk us through what those mean?
So there are on this. There are a number of categories on which we grade the students, and it's graded as 1, 2, and 3, 1 being the best and 3 being the worst. So it's a simple 3-point grading system.
Is 3 equated with, it looks like a traffic signal, is 3 equated with red?
Yes, and 2 is yellow and 1 is green.
Okay. In this particular evaluation, how many different categories do you have to evaluate the defendant on?
A number of them. There are 11 categories here.
Did they cover the gamut of presentation substance versus style, that sort of stuff?
Yes.
Now, were there things that you rated the defendant a 1 on, a green on?
I think it looks like the project background and rationale were adequately presented. I think so. That was rated a 1. Experimental approach was adequately explained. That was rated 1. Data were analyzed appropriately. Conclusions were drawn logically. Slides were clear and easy to understand. And overall, the slides were well organized.
Were there cautionary things about your evaluation regarding the defendant's performance?
Yes, there were. So there were other categories in which he got a 2. One was hypothesis not being that clearly stated. Quality of data, voice, speaking volume, mannerisms of the student, and then student responded appropriately to comments and questions from the audience. That was a little weak as well.
All right. Now, you also had a place where you could put some narrative comments in there?
Yes.
What was the gist of what you took away from the defendant's performance on this first lab rotation talk back in November of 2011?
So there were 2 concerns that were noted. One is better speaking skills, learn to appear more interested in communicating with the audience, and he was much better when he spoke to the audience rather than facing the screen and speaking in that direction. And the second concern was with organization. And it says, while it's okay for a rotation project to confirm existing findings, those findings need to be presented first rather than in the middle of the project.
All in all, for a first rotation presentation, in your experience of doing this now for, how many years have you been doing it?
I don't know, about 10, 12 years maybe.
10 or 12 years. How would you rate this performance?
I would say it was probably an average performance.
Average performance. Now, did you have an opportunity to share with the defendant your concerns and suggestions on how to improve?
Yes.
And how did he respond to that?
I think he was always very deferential and took my suggestions quite seriously throughout my interactions with him.
Now, was he more engaging or more talkative with you about this than he had been before, or was it more receptive to your advice?
I think he was more receptive, not more talkative.
And during your entire time with him, always polite?
Yes.
Always professional?
Yes.
After this evaluation, at the end of that first rotation, what happens next for the students?
At the end of the first rotation, after the evaluation, they by this time would have entered their second rotation labs.
Okay. And did the defendant do that?
Yes.
Do you remember the name of the person he did his second rotation?
He did a second rotation with Professor Mark Delacqua.
And we'll hear from Professor Delacqua. Is it doctor or professor? What do you guys go by?
Professor. Well,
Professor? Is he one better than the other? Doctor, professor?
Yeah. Anything. Call us anything you want.
Okay. That guy,
yeah,
Delacqua, professor, we're going to hear from him. Did you get feedback, without going into the details of it, did you get feedback from Professor Delacqua about the defendant's performance on that second rotation?
Yes.
Now, that second rotation, you said starts in roughly November, and when does it end?
It ends in February some point.
Ends in February. And by the way, all along the times of these rotations, there's also classwork being done during the week.
Yes.
All right. That second rotation, did you have the opportunity to have more contact with the defendant about ways that he could improve?
Yes.
In general, without getting into all the specifics, were the concerns of the second rotation for the defendant similar to the first rotation?
It was similar to the first. The concerns were similar, but I think the professor was more firm in his decision.
They did not get along.
That he didn't want him in the lab. Yes.
Okay. That ends in about February, and then there's a third lab rotation?
Yes.
And do you remember who the defendant had for his third lab rotation?
With Professor Kurt Fried.
Okay, and we're going to hear from Professor Kurt Fried as well. Do you remember what concerns in general were expressed by Professor Fried about the defendant?
The concerns that Professor Fried expressed were again similar in that he seemed not engaged in the lab, in the science. He wasn't communicating well with either Professor Fried or to other people in the lab, and he was concerned about what effect his presence in the lab might influence the morale of the lab.
Pretty consistent throughout these three labs.
Yes.
Now, you've also had the opportunity, when you, in the position you're in, to monitor the schoolwork progress of these, of the other 5 students over this.
Yes.
Now, did you have the opportunity to determine what the average GPA for the fall and the spring were for the students not including the defendant?
The average GPA for the fall and was about 3.35 or something to that effect, and the average for the spring was 3.7.
And overall, do you remember?
Overall, I think it was about 3.5.
Okay, and we'll have someone come later and talk about the grades for the defendant specifically. One of the ways in which you've said you've communicated is you've had face-to-face meetings with the defendant. How many do you think you had over the course of the time you were with him?
Probably 10, 12, maybe.
Okay, and we'll talk about those, the last one in a bit here. But leading up to June, were all of the meetings pretty consistent with the defendant in terms of his presentation and demeanor?
Yes.
Did you also have the opportunity to communicate with him in writing?
Yes, by emails, yes.
And do you make any distinction between the way he communicated with you in writing and the way he presented in person?
It's hard for me to compare the two. I think he was very polite both in presence, in verbal communications as well as in emails.
That's email. That should be the hard copy. I just tabbed in here for the dates. Could I have a moment, Your Honor?
Yes.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor, with what's been marked as People's Exhibit 1200?
Yes.
Sir, I'm handing you this People's Exhibit 1200. Take a look at that and tell me if you recognize what is in there.
These are all more or less housekeeping emails where I've asked him about his rotations, his rehearsing his rotation talk with me before presenting it to the rest of the audience and so forth.
Is that pretty normal, by the way?
That's very normal.
Now, in terms of that packet, that People's 1200, does that include every single email ever possibly sent between you and the defendant? Or just a sampling of them?
I would suspect that it has all, if not most, if not all of the emails I've sent.
Do those emails that you've had the chance to review before you came in here, do those look accurate? Like these are the communications that you and he shared over email over that period of time?
Yes.
Does it look like anybody has altered them or changed them in any way?
No.
Okay. I'm going to talk to you about some things that lead up to the last couple, and then I'll ask the court to move to admit those. When we were talking before about some of the concerns that you shared with the defendant and led to you giving him some advice on how to improve, I didn't ask you for specific details about what the professors would say, but I want to talk to you about what you talked to him about, okay? Were there ever concerns brought to your attention that you relayed to him about humor in presentations?
There was one occasion where a concern was raised about inappropriate humor, or it's just humor in presentations that didn't work.
Now, when you say inappropriate humor, the non-science guy thinks one thing, but tell us for the science world what inappropriate humor means.
It didn't. It basically meant that he inserted, funny jokes in the middle that didn't work and distracted from the rest of his presentation and substance.
And that was it. That was the complaint that you got from someone that, hey, this just isn't the right forum for any humor.
I guess the complaint was that it wasn't the forum. I think the complaint was that it just distracted. No, it wasn't the right thing to do.
Do you remember what it was?
It was about some factor which I don't remember, which could be abbreviated as ATM, and there was a joke which said, I've to the effect that I've characterized this ATM and you can take it to the bank.
And scientists don't find that funny.
Oh, well, I found it funny, but not everybody.
Okay. And so you talked with the defendant about, hey, let's tone down some of the humor part of this.
Yes.
And he seemed amenable to that.
Absolutely.
All right. Does it seem like he made that change moving forward with the other presentations?
Yes, he did.
Never got that complaint again?
No.
Okay. Now, for the preliminary exam, you'd mentioned that earlier. That particular exam, is it a capstone type test for the year that you've had in neuroscience?
Yes.
Well, and you know what, don't use my word. Just describe for us what it is and whether it's written or oral, all of it.
Okay, so it's an oral exam, or it was in 2011 an oral exam, and it was conducted by a committee of faculty who had participated in teaching the first year students throughout the year, and there were two committees of 3 faculty each representing three major areas of neuroscience, and the oral interview the oral exam consisted of them asking questions, testing students' ability to reason, to think on their feet, their conceptual knowledge, and so forth.
And those three professors are peppering them with questions?
Yeah.
What is the scope of the material covered?
The material covered is essentially the material that was covered in various lectures throughout the course of the year.
And as the PhD candidate person, you're just responsible for being up to speed on all that?
Yes.
Now, before we start to get to this performance stuff, there's a couple areas I want to talk to you about. You had the opportunity to meet with the defendant one-on-one. Describe his demeanor and his affect to you in those settings?
I think his demeanor has always been courteous but withdrawn. His affect was flat. No, I never seen him get very excited or enthusiastic, at least outwardly. And he, throughout the process, came across as a person who was very introverted and socially awkward.
It didn't say a lot of words.
Yeah, I think didn't say a lot of unnecessary words.
Okay. For the presentations that you had the opportunity to observe, how was his demeanor and affect?
Essentially, it was the same criticism in the sense that his presentations were more mechanical, lacked enough affect, and definitely lacked the enthusiasm that could be communicated to an audience in such settings like these.
So, do you remember the date of the prelims for the defendant back in 2012?
It was June 7th, I believe.
All right. Now, you give those students a lot of advance notice on this.
Yes.
And you weren't participating in the prelims?
No.
Did you get feedback after the conclusion of those prelims?
Yes.
And all 6 students in neuroscience do it on one day?
Yes.
And the defendant did it?
Yes.
Now, up to that point, by the way, had you ever received any feedback the defendant didn't come to class?
Not that it was communicated to me.
How about that he wasn't coming to the lab?
Again, no.
That he wasn't turning in his homework?
No.
All right. And in this particular case, he shows up, as far as you know, on time, at the right place, at the right time?
Yes.
You got feedback on his presentation, and, tell us what the feedback was.
I think the feedback was essentially that there were a lot of conceptual weaknesses. There was weaknesses in using concepts and reasoning abilities to extrapolate a concept to the next level. And I think those probably were the major concerns.
Now, at that point, had you just made the decision, that's it, then we're just going to part ways with the defendant?
No.
Why not?
It is. So I had a talk with his committee, which consisted of the 3 faculty members, and talked about how bad was it? Was it something that's redeemable? And the conclusion we arrived at was that he should be given another chance to take the prelims, and he should, before that, talk with the members of the committee to know what his weaknesses were, and then be given some time to prepare for a retake.
Now, had this happened before in your 10 to 12 years there, that someone has had to retake the prelims?
Yes. Yes. It has happened. So the prelims, let me just clarify that. So the prelims, when we see weaknesses, we have the students do remedial stuff, and that has happened many times before, where the student has been said, you are weak in this, you need to get better handle on the concepts in this, and we want you to go into the second year and retake this course, for example. And those kind of decisions have been made a number of times in the past. But I don't think the entire prelim exam has been retaken.
And have you had people that have been offered the opportunity to take the prelims again and have made the decision to just drop out of the program?
Not at that juncture, no. But we have had people who drop out of the program for other reasons.
Okay. There was also the issue with the rotations.
Yeah.
And the possibility that the defendant would have to do what if he was going to find a rotation?
Could you rephrase that question?
Yeah, I'm sorry. If someone doesn't find a rotation that they can join, that either they want to join or the doctor wants to join them out of those three, what does the program do for them?
So the programs, at this point in their training, the job of the program, the graduate training committee, is to make sure they all find homes to do their thesis. And in this particular case, I knew for sure that Dr. Delacqua wasn't going to take him, but I hadn't gotten a firm no from either Dr. Klug or Dr. Fried. So I was in the midst of talking to them to see if they would take him in the lab.
And you don't know what they expressed to the defendant at that point about any concerns they had?
I don't know the details of any concerns that they expressed, yes.
Okay. Now, in terms of the performance of the defendant on the prelims, and frankly, over the course of the year, you had said, coming in, he had these great grades, this great GRE score. Did you have different expectations for his performance in the classroom and laboratory setting?
Yes.
And he failed to achieve those?
Yes.
Is that the first time someone has failed to appear in person and in labs as they did on paper?
Probably not.
Is there a big difference in your experience between undergrad and this program?
There is a big difference between undergrad and graduate program, yes.
What is it?
The main difference, I would say, would be that if you enter a research program, a lot of your success depends on things like self-motivation, the ability to learn on your own, the ability to learn to reason well, to design experiments. I mean, those are not things that are critical to success in an undergrad setting, but they are to a graduate program setting.
And they're different even than just the regular classroom work?
Yes.
And that's where you find that out, is in those labs?
Could you rephrase that again?
Yeah, that's where you find out whether someone has the initiative, the self-motivation, the creativity to come up with their own experiments is in that lab?
Yes.
Okay. Now, after you get the feedback on the defendant's performance on the prelims, do you reach out to him?
Yes.
How'd you do it?
I sent him an email asking him to come and meet me.
And did you guys have an exchange in email about setting up that meeting?
Yes.
Are those emails contained in People's Exhibit 1200? Towards the back.
Yes.
All right, now tell us, did you end up having that meeting with the defendant?
Yes.
Was it in your office?
Yes.
Tell us about it.
It was a short meeting. It was much shorter than I had anticipated, and we just met for maybe a few minutes, and I had sent him an email saying that the reviewers were concerned about the examiners were concerned about his performance in the prelims, and that we needed to talk about it. My intention was to give him that feedback and set up times to do a retake. So when he came in, I said, you did poorly in the exam. I think I also said something to the effect of, is this what you wanted to do? No, is this what you want to do as a career? And that we would have a retake of the exam, at which point he told me that he had decided to quit the program.
And was that unexpected?
That was unexpected.
And how did he tell you?
I think he just said he decided to leave the program.
And did you try to talk him out of it?
No. I think I said, no, if that's what is best, you feel is best for you, that's no.
of that conversation that you had with him?
I think the gist of the conversation is what I just relayed. I'm not sure exactly what else.
I mean, does it end with a handshake, a hug, chest bump? How does it end?
Yeah, high fives. No, I think it just ended quite cordially, and he said he was planning to leave, and I said, if you're planning to leave, then you need to send me an official email saying that you are, with effect, immediately leaving the program.
And did he do that?
Yes.
Is that also contained in People's Exhibit 1200?
Yes.
Describe for us his demeanor and his presentation to you in that final meeting.
I think his demeanor was still reserved, still withdrawn, and still devoid of affect.
Now listen, over the course of this time, from the time that you first interview with him in February of 2011 until he is walking out of your office in June, I may not have asked you this, Doctor. What day was it in June that you met with him?
This was June 9th, I think.
June 9th?
Yeah.
Is he the same guy over that whole period of time? I mean, did you detect any big differences between him in February of 2011 and June of 2012?
Members of the jury, it's 3:35, so I think it's a good time to take our afternoon break. So let's take 20 minutes. Please keep all the admonitions that I have been giving you in mind and continue to comply with all of them. Enjoy the break.
This is it. This is the whole thing.
To reflect that the jury has exited the courtroom, and doctor will have you wait outside. Is it doctor or professor? Either way. All right, thank you.
Should I leave this?
You can leave that there. Yes, thank you.
I included by error on the back of the exhibit copy. Case that we read up.
Here, I'll take a look at it. Everyone may be seated, by the way. No? Okay. All right. The objection is as to relevance and cumulative. Do you want to respond?
I do, Your Honor. As to relevance, in this case, the defendant has put his mental health at issue. This goes to his state of mind, ability to function, his ability to respond, a lot of cognitive different things in his responses to and from this particular mentor over the period of, I think it covers August to June of the time in question, leading up to about 6 weeks prior to the shooting in this particular case. That's why it's relevant, Your Honor. He's pleaded insanity.
All right, any response?
Your Honor, as the court can see in those emails, they're very short housekeeping emails. For example, can you meet with me Monday at 10? Yes, see you then. I don't think that has any relevance or any indication about the mental state of a person. And we would object in the ones where the professor testified about setting up the meeting in June, where Mr. Holmes said that he was quitting the program, has been testified to. There's nothing in those emails that add anything to what the professor testified to.
Your Honor, may I respond?
Last.
Yes, just very briefly. There's going to be a testimony by defense experts about a deteriorating intellect and deteriorating mental state, and it's important that this guy is as responsive in June of 2012 as he was in August of 2011. There is no visible change in his ability to respond or the information he conveys from one email to the next, showing a level of consistency that rebuts that.
All right, your last reply.
Your Honor, we're not alleging he's developmentally disabled. He can still write emails if he's significantly and seriously mentally ill. Schizophrenics can write emails. He's not developmentally disabled.
Right, but I think what he was doing, how he was communicating, how he was interacting with people, how he lived, all those things become relevant when someone pleads not guilty by reason of insanity. And to the extent that there's an argument in this case that his mental health deteriorated over time, then I think it's important to allow the jury to see evidence before and after, and the jury can make a decision on its own. So it is relevant. It does have probative value. In terms of the objection with respect to cumulative, I don't think that he read verbatim the response that the defendant provided or the email that the defendant sent when he indicated that he was going to quit. I think he simply said that that email is included in the exhibit, People's Exhibit P-TR-1200. So it's not cumulative. And I will note that most of the emails are in 2012. There is one email from August of 2011. There's another email from November 2011. Then the rest of the emails are in 2012. They pick up with January 10, 2012. And then they are in chronological order. There are emails in January, February, from February jumps to May. Then it goes to June. And then the last email is dated June 11 of 2012. I think that the argument that was just made by Ms. Brady goes to the weight of the evidence, not its admissibility. In terms of relevance, this has probative value. I will note that one of the theories that the prosecution has advanced in this case is that one of the motives for the shooting had to do with the defendant's failures in school. And so this is one of the issues that is in the center of the case, or at the center of the case. It's at the heart of the case. It goes to the insanity defense. The people claim that one of the things that led to the shooting was this lack of sense of purpose, which was in part caused by failures at school. Well, these are emails related to school. These are emails between a defendant and his mentor at school. And they show communications beginning in August of 2011 and ending in June of 2012. And so they do have some probative value to the defense of insanity. In terms of the objection as to relevance, it is overruled pursuant to Rules 401 and 402. In terms of the cumulative objection, it is overruled pursuant to Rule 403. So the exhibit is admitted over objection. You can take it back, Mr. Bruckler. All right, folks, we'll go on break. Enjoy the break.
I will.
I know.
Because I'm trying to.
It's funny how life just happens. It unfolds, though everyone seems so different, until you know them a little, even just for a minute, a second, a flash, because we're closer than we think. It's just us, in this world, on this planet, intensely quiet, yet brilliant. Seems like we forget, and we're gently reminded, we're all the same, because we're all one. We're all one.
Whether you're writing a cover letter for your dream job, finishing an essay for school, or just writing a normal everyday email, you rely on your spell checker to give you confidence that what you wrote is both easy to understand and mistake-free. According to Microsoft Word's Spell and Grammar Checker, this short 2-page document is free of mistakes and ready to go. However, with a click on the Grammarly button, you quickly discover that this document actually contains 18 mistakes in only 350 words. Microsoft Office can't find any of these errors for you. Say hello to your new favorite writing companion, Grammarly. Grammarly is an automated proofreader that picks up on more than 250 types of contextual spelling, advanced grammar, and even writing style errors. It catches over 10 times more mistakes than Microsoft Office can find. Correcting a mistake is very easy. It just takes a single click. If you want to learn more about the writing error you made, you can also expand the mistake card to find clear suggestions for how to improve your writing. Grammarly's state-of-the-art technology adapts to your writing needs, and integration with both Microsoft Word and Outlook ensures that your spelling and grammar are impeccable no matter where you choose to write. Let Grammarly help you write concisely, save time proofreading emails, and ensure that your resume and cover letter are mistake-free. The Grammarly add-in works well with Word and Outlook for Microsoft Office versions 2007 and onward. Download it today and see just how great mistake-free writing can be.
This is the people of the state of Colorado versus James Egan Holmes, case number 12 CR 1522. The record should reflect that Mr. Holmes is present with his attorneys and the prosecutors are present as well. We are outside the presence of the jury. Two things. First, with respect to the last objection, I remember during the break that during opening statements, the defense also mentioned sort of the opposite of what the prosecution argued. The defense argued that the deterioration in Mr. Holmes' school performance is an indicator that he was having mental health issues. And so, just as the prosecution is arguing that there was really no change in the way Mr. Holmes was interacting with people at school, the defense is sort of arguing the opposite. So I think Exhibit P-TR-1200 goes to the issue of mental illness, and if there is mental illness, the severity of that mental illness. And so, of course, by extension, that means that it goes to the issue of insanity. So I wanted to supplement the record with that. Secondly, I checked the motion that the media filed earlier with respect to getting access to exhibits that are admitted. It's motion C-193. The motion included a request not only for admitted exhibits, but also exhibits that are not admitted, which I am not granting access to. But in addition, exhibits that are admitted and not published. And so the transcript would fall within that. I brought it up because my ruling related to written material, and this is written material, it's just that it was not displayed on the big screen. So the prosecution has stated its no position. I think the prosecution said that it might make sense to provide the audio recording as well. I'm not going to do that. But in terms of the transcript, is there any other argument you want to make, Ms. Nelson?
Yeah,
Okay. The objection's overruled. We'll provide the transcript. It's been admitted, and I don't see any concerns with providing it. So we'll include it among the documents that are provided to the media, given that it's been admitted, and given that it's been published to the jury, albeit not on the big screen that is in the view of this CCTV camera. Okay, let's bring the jury in, please. Option 1. The record should reflect that the jury has joined us again. Welcome back, members of the jury. Right before the break, the prosecution was still in the middle of its direct examination of Dr. Vijayaraghavan, and the doctor has resumed the witness stand. There was a request by the prosecution to admit People's Exhibit P-TR-1200, and that exhibit has been admitted over objection. Mr. Brockler, you may proceed with your direct examination, and doctor, I will remind you that you're still under oath.
Mercifully, Judge, we are not in the middle. I just only have a few questions left. Okay. Sir, because of what's contained in the emails, I want to ask you, do you go by a nickname that might appear in some of those emails?
People call me Sook.
Sook, S-U-K-E?
Yeah.
All right. The last couple things I want to talk with you about are this. You talked about, at the beginning of this application process, applicants like the defendant expressing to you what their career ambitions were. Do you remember, in essence, what the defendant's career ambition was as he headed into this program?
As I recall, he expressed interest in being an academic scientist, first remaining in academia after his PhD.
What was the status of that career ambition as he walked out of your office in June of 2012?
Well,
I'd object to speculation, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Was that going to happen through your program when he walked out of your office in June of 2012?
No.
Objection to speculation.
Overruled.
Go ahead, sir. What was it?
No.
May I have a moment, Your Honor?
Yes.
Nothing further, Your Honor. Thank you.
All right. Cross-examination, Ms. Brady.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So James Holmes applied to the graduate school at UC Denver in early 2011. Is that correct?
Yes.
And as you testified on direct, that's a competitive process to get accepted into that graduate school.
Yes.
And I think you testified that there were approximately 75 applications to get into that program.
They are usually 75. I'm not sure what the number was for that particular year.
But that would be an average number?
Approximately.
Okay. And approximately 12 or 13 are invited back to that recruitment weekend that you described for the jury.
Yes.
And Mr. Holmes was one of those 12 or 13 that was invited in for an interview.
Yes.
Out of the 12 or 13 that are interviewed, approximately 5 or 6 are accepted.
More than that are accepted. Some choose to go to other places.
Got you. So approximately 10 are offered spots, and then maybe half of those accept.
Yeah, something around that. Yeah.
Okay. And you knew at that time that Mr. Holmes was coming from University of California at Riverside.
Yes.
And he did his undergraduate degree in neurobiology.
Yes.
And as you testified, he came in with an excellent grade point average.
Yes.
And he came in with an excellent GRE score.
Yes.
Would you agree with me that it would take someone who was pretty self-motivated to get out of undergraduate degree in neurobiology, it would take someone who's pretty motivated to get those kind of scores?
Yes.
You couldn't be lazy and get those kind of scores.
Yes.
He came to your program with 3 letters of recommendation.
Yes.
2 of those were authored by well-recognized scientists who were known to you and your committee, correct?
Yes.
And those letters of recommendation were extremely positive in describing Mr. Holmes.
Yes.
They did not say that he was unmotivated, did they?
No.
It said that they described him as motivated, smart, and committed to research.
Yes.
Because of those things, Mr. Holmes was considered at the top of the application pool when he showed up here in Denver.
Yes.
He did 7 interviews with faculty members for about 30 minutes each, you said.
Yes.
And some of the concerns from those interviews were that he appeared extremely quiet.
Yes.
And there was some concern about whether he was interested in the program.
Yes.
Despite those letters of recommendation that said he was very committed to research.
Yes.
So that seemed to be inconsistent, what was coming from UC Riverside and what your folks were seeing when they interviewed him.
Not necessarily. If he wasn't interested in joining our place, he could appear disinterested.
Did he seem to you like he was interested in joining your school?
Yes, or at least I didn't have any evidence to suggest otherwise.
Okay, and you had conversation with him about the kind of research that you do, and you thought that he seemed interested in your research.
Yes.
But there was this continuing concern about how socially awkward he was.
Yes.
You've described him as a sort of person who doesn't really initiate conversation very easily.
I would agree, yeah.
And he's not the type of person to tell stories over dinner, I think you've said.
Yeah.
Is that true?
Yeah.
But you did feel that he was very smart. Was that your impression?
Yes.
You testified just a few minutes ago that he wanted to be an academic scientist. What does that mean to you?
That usually means somebody who's interested in getting a job in a university or a college and continuing research in their own laboratories.
So he wanted to...
Laboratories.
So he wanted to have his own lab and do research. And when he told you that, you felt that he was being forthright and honest with you about those goals.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. When you've described him, you describe him as sort of asocial. Not that he's rude or impolite, but just that he's extremely quiet.
Yes.
And you told Mr. Brockler earlier he was always very polite and professional with you.
Yes.
Never disrespectful or rude.
No.
You have described him as a thoughtful person. Is that your impression of him?
I would have thought that, yeah.
But he was subdued.
Yes.
He always dressed appropriately.
Yes.
He appeared scholarly to you.
People that are in this business, they'll lead you astray. This is not what God intended for you to do with your life.
My mother had sick. They described him as motivated, smart, and committed to research.
Yes.
Because of those things, Mr. Holmes was considered at the top of the application pool when he showed up here in Denver.
Yes.
He did 7 interviews with faculty members. For about 30 minutes each, you said.
Yes.
And some of the concerns from those interviews were that he appeared extremely quiet.
Yes.
And there was some concern about whether he was interested in the program.
Yes.
Despite those letters of recommendation. That said he was very committed to research.
Yes.
So that seemed to be inconsistent, what was coming from UC Riverside and what your folks were seeing when they interviewed him.
Not necessarily. If he wasn't interested in joining our place, he could appear disinterested.
Did he seem to you like he was interested in joining your school?
Yes, or at least I didn't have any evidence to suggest otherwise.
Okay, and you had conversation with him about the kind of research that you do, and you thought that he seemed interested in your research.
Yes.
But there was this continuing concern about how socially awkward he was.
Yes.
You have, you've described him as a sort of person who doesn't really initiate conversation very easily.
I would agree, yeah.
And he's not the type of person to tell stories over dinner, I think you've said.
Yeah.
Is that true? But you did feel that he was very smart. Was that your impression?
Yes.
You testified just a few minutes ago that he wanted to be an academic scientist. What does that mean to you?
That usually means somebody who's interested in getting a job in a university or a college and continuing research in their own laboratories.
So he wanted to...
Laboratories.
So he wanted to have his own lab and do research. And when he told you that, you felt that he was being forthright and honest with you about those goals.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. When you've described him, you describe him as sort of asocial. Not that he's rude or impolite, but just that he's extremely quiet.
Yes.
And you told Mr. Brockler earlier he was always very polite and professional with you.
Yes.
Never disrespectful or rude.
No.
You have described him as a thoughtful person. Is that your impression of him?
I would have thought that, yeah.
But he was subdued.
Yes.
He always dressed appropriately.
Yes.
He appeared scholarly to you.
If you could define that. But, yes.
I guess just another word for smart and interested in learning.
Yes.
And you were pleased when he was accepted at your school.
Yes.
School began in August of 2012. The official school year began August of 2012.
Yes.
And as you testified, you were his academic advisor while he was there.
Yes.
And met with him approximately once a month for maybe 30 minutes.
Yeah, I would assume something like that.
Okay. So didn't spend a great deal of time with him.
No.
Did he ever seek you out, knock on your door or seek you out for questions or conversation?
He might have, but I don't recall.
Okay. And is it fair to say you didn't have much of a personal relationship with him?
Yes.
At one point you said that he was a complete mystery to you. Is that fair?
I don't remember saying that, but it would be fair.
Okay. He did have some mannerisms that you were trying to help him with.
Yes.
And in the past, you've sort of described those as tics or odd mannerisms. Can you tell the jury a little bit more about what those involved?
I think most of them involve some kind of not in context hand gestures or facial expressions, more than tics.
So more than a tic.
I would explain it as some out of context hand gestures and facial expressions. Yes.
Okay, that didn't seem appropriate for the context.
Yeah.
And again, appropriate meaning what you would not rude or offensive.
No,
but
it's just that it didn't go with the context.
Okay. He never appeared to be an attention seeker to you?
No.
Quite the opposite. He seemed to be someone who sort of stayed in the background.
Yes.
In fact, a big criticism of him is that he didn't interact enough.
Yes.
Both with professors and with fellow students.
Yes.
While you knew him, was his hair always the color that it is now, brown?
I think so.
And if I can approach the witness, I'm going to show him Defense Exhibit D-TR-7.
Yes.
Professor, does that appear to be a series of pictures of Mr. Holmes?
Yes.
Have you ever seen those pictures before?
Yes. Some of them, maybe.
Can you explain to the jury under what circumstance you saw those pictures?
In the newspapers.
And can you describe what Mr. Holmes looks like in that series of pictures?
His hair is dyed orange, and his eyes look awakened or tired in some of these photos.
Your Honor, may we publish that picture so that the jury can see it?
Are you moving to admit it?
Not at this time. All right, I can. I'll move to admit it at this point.
You can't publish it without it having it admitted, but if you're moving to admit it, is there any objection? Let's have counsel approach. Okay, the objection on relevance is overruled. The objection on foundation or lack of foundation is sustained pursuant to Rule 602. But Ms. Brady, you may establish more foundation.
When you saw that picture of Mr. Holmes with the orange hair in the newspaper, was that shortly after July 20th of 2012?
Yes.
Within days?
Yes.
Had you ever seen Mr. Holmes with orange hair before?
No.
Had his hair always been brown prior when you knew him the entire time?
Yes.
Your Honor, I would move to admit Defense Exhibit 7.
Any additional objection? All right, Exhibit D-TR-7 is admitted and may be published.
Thank you. Thank you. Professor, I want to talk to you about just an overview of Mr. Holmes's first year at the school. As his academic advisor, were you familiar with sort of the schedule that he kept as a first-year grad student there?
Yes.
Your Honor, if I can approach the witness, please.
Yes.
I'm going to show the witness what's been marked D-TR-8. Professor, have you had a chance to look at Exhibit 8 before coming in today?
Yes.
And can you explain to the jury generally what Exhibit 8 is, please?
So Exhibit 8 contains a timeline with a series of courses along that James had to take, and a list of the lab rotations that he had to take, and ending with the oral exam on June 7th.
And does that timeline sort of help put into perspective which labs he was taking while he was taking certain classes?
Yes.
Over the period of August to June 2011 to 2012?
Yes.
Your Honor, I'd move to admit D-TR-8.
Any objection? All right, without objection, it is admitted and may be published.
Thank you. If we could zoom into the three top boxes there, please. Is that as big as it gets? Professor, can you tell us what is represented by the three white boxes?
So the three white boxes represent the three lab rotations that James did, and the PI or the mentor of the lab is given on top, and so they were Hakim Klug, Mark Delacroix, and Kurt Fried, and below that are the members of the lab who would have overlapped with him, and then the period of the rotation for each of them is given, which is August 2011 to November for the first rotation, November to February for the second rotation, and February to May for the third rotation.
Thank you. If we could pull out the core courses, please. That's better. Professor, if you could tell us what is represented by each of these boxes with the core courses.
So the core courses are a list of courses that all our incoming PhD students take, irrespective of what program they are in. So this is taken by all the students who matriculate in a particular year, and this course is split into 5, and usually goes through fundamentals of molecular biology and biophysics for all students.
Right, and then what do the dates correspond to?
So the dates are the start and the end dates for each of these core modules.
Thank you. If we could call out the bottom boxes, please. The bottom 5 boxes, please. Professor, what do these represent?
So, in addition to the core courses that I mentioned, which are taken by all graduate students, neuroscience students are expected to take more specialized neuroscience-related courses, and these are listed here. The first one they take is cellular and molecular neurobiology, which goes from August to November. And then there is systems neurobiology, also known as fundamentals of neurobiology. That's from December to March. And third is developmental neurobiology. That's from March to May. And overlapping these are 2 other courses, one of which is taken by all neuroscience students, which is the grant writing workshop, where we teach students how to write scientific grants. And then, in addition, there is an elective course which the students can choose to take, and that is the biological basis of psychiatric and neurological disorders.
Thank you. If we could call out the blue box to the far right, please. And Professor, what does this box represent?
So this represents the preliminary exam that I had talked about previously. And this was, as I said, an oral preliminary exam. And it was held June 7th, 2012. And the 3 members of the examining committee are Drs. Sather, Restrepo, and Fenninger.
Right, thank you. Did you actually have an opportunity to lecture at one of the classes that Mr. Holmes was in?
I think I gave, I'm not sure, I think I did give 2 lectures in that class.
Okay, and was your observation that Mr. Holmes remained completely silent unless you specifically called on him?
Yes.
One of the 3 committee members for that final oral exam, I think you said, was Carl Fenninger?
Yeah.
Has Dr. Fenninger passed away since 2012?
Yes, I think last month.
I'll talk to you for a minute about those 3 labs. You've testified already that undergrad students go through a series of 1, 2, and then the 3rd lab during the course of the year.
Yes.
And it's somewhat up to the student to seek out a lab or one of the instructors that student wants to work with.
Yes.
And the 3 labs that Mr. Holmes did were shown on that last exhibit we looked at.
Yes.
And the first one you said was with Joachim Klug.
Yes.
And that's Klug.
Right.
Okay. And as you testified earlier, Dr. Klug had concerns about whether Mr. Holmes was interacting enough in the lab.
Yes.
I take it that in the laboratory there are students who are working together toward a common purpose. Is that accurate?
In the broad scheme of things, yes.
Okay, so that can't be done just by yourself. You have to interact with the principal investigator and with the other graduate students.
Yes.
Okay, and that seemed to be what Mr. Holmes was receiving criticism about.
Yes.
Not being able to do that.
Right.
And you shared those criticisms with Mr. Holmes, that he was being criticized for not interacting.
Yes.
And he seemed receptive to your suggestion that he needed to do that.
Yes.
And yet the second lab with Professor Delacroix, things were not any better.
Yes.
In fact, it seemed like maybe they were worse.
Yes.
Professor Delacroix said that Mr. Holmes was completely non-interactive.
Yes.
And Professor Delacroix had concerns about Mr. Holmes' experimental capabilities.
Yes.
And again, in the third lab with Professor Freed, the criticism was that Mr. Holmes was not interacting enough. And throughout the entire time that you knew Mr. Holmes, he had a flat affect.
Yes.
Meaning he did not show much or any emotion.
Right.
Just very flat. When a grad student is in these labs, at the end of the lab, they have to do a short oral presentation.
Yes.
And that was what you were describing, that there's a PowerPoint and they do the short presentation, and then the people in the room can ask questions.
Yes.
And you said that part of the criticism of Mr. Holmes in those lab presentations was that he appeared, I think you said, mechanical or very sort of flat still.
Yes.
But he would awkwardly try and insert these jokes into the presentation.
Yes.
And the people watching the presentation were very uncomfortable with his attempt at humor.
Yes.
Were there also concerns about these funny hand gestures and facial expressions that you talked about earlier?
Not that anybody raised them as concerns.
But those were concerns that you were addressing with him. On the lab sheet that the prosecution talked to you about, that green, yellow, red evaluation sheet, you filled that out because you watched Mr. Holmes in his first lab presentation.
Yes.
And I think, if my memory serves me, you gave him 7 marks in the green area, that he did pretty good in 7 of those areas.
I assume so, yeah. I don't remember.
But you gave him yellow marks, which would be the middle rating, in his mannerisms. The category is mannerisms of the student were appropriate, and that was one area where you did not give him the green good mark, you gave him a yellow mark.
Yes.
Indicating some concerns about that.
Yes.
And response and responding appropriately with the audience. That was another area where you gave him the yellow mark indicating concern. But in several other areas, you felt like he was doing okay.
Yes.
And that was the first lab rotation.
Yes.
Do you agree that the mannerisms and the interaction with the audience, those are both areas that involve the social aspect of graduate school.
Yes.
Now, those 3 lab presentations, those are different than the final end of the year oral preliminary exam. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So the very final end of the year exam occurred, like the chart said, June 7th of 2012.
Yes.
With those 3 members of the staff who would listen to the presentation and ask questions of the student, testing what they had learned that year.
Right. I think the prelims did not have an independent presentation from the student. It was more of a question-answer kind of.
So that was more of the 3 committee members asking questions to test knowledge.
Yes.
And you were not present for that final exam.
No.
It's only those 3 committee members.
Yes.
And the committee expressed after that final exam concern that Mr. Holmes did not conceptually understand the topics. Is that correct?
I think that he was weak on certain concepts that were covered in these topics.
And they were concerned that he didn't have any more than a superficial understanding of the concepts.
Yes.
And despite that, the committee, in conversation with you, decided to have him do a retest.
Yes.
And that would have involved Mr. Holmes going to those 3 committee members and saying, hey, what did I miss? What do I need to work on to do better at the next test?
Yes.
The program does all it can to make sure that a student does well. Is that fair?
Yes.
Explain that to the jury, please.
I think when we admit a student, we assume that given the right resources and help, they would succeed, and we invest a lot on these students, both in terms of faculty time as well as in terms of financial resources. And therefore, I think our aim is to do everything we can to make sure that they succeed.
And it's in that spirit that Mr. Holmes was being offered the second chance to retake the preliminary exam.
Yes.
When you met with Mr. Holmes to talk about this retest, do you believe that conversation took place approximately June 11th?
Yes.
If you need to look at those emails, that might help you remember exactly when that meeting would have taken place.
I don't have it with me.
Are you referring to Exhibit P-TR-1200?
Yes, sir.
I don't have him. I think I give him back to Mr. Brockler. Do you have him, Mr. Brockler?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, there we go. Thank you, Ms. Curlins.
Thank you.
And I can maybe help you. I think it's 3 pages from the back might help you with that date.
Yeah, so this is June 11th.
So that was the day that Mr. Holmes came to your office to talk about the preliminary exam.
Yes.
You explained to Mr. Holmes that he didn't do well and that he would have to do a retest.
Yes.
And you said fairly quickly he told you he was just going to quit the program.
Yes.
And that was very unexpected from him.
Yes.
He took the news without any outward reaction.
Yes.
Like he didn't get angry?
No.
He didn't yell?
No.
He didn't get defensive?
No.
He didn't just stomp out?
No.
He said to you, I don't do well with oral communication?
Yes.
Was that the last conversation that you had with Mr. Holmes?
Yes.
And again, just to be clear, you didn't tell him he had to leave the program?
No.
And you didn't encourage him to leave the program?
No.
In fact, you, like you said before, the program wanted to give him another chance to help him be successful?
Yes.
The status of Mr. Holmes' academic situation at that point was he was going to have to take this retest, correct?
Yes.
And there was figuring out whether Professor Klug or Professor Freed would have him back in their lab.
Yes.
So that the doors were not closed to 2 out of the 3 labs.
Yes.
It was still possible he could have joined those labs.
It was still a possibility, yes.
It was being discussed.
Yes.
If worse came to worse, could Mr. Holmes have also done maybe a summer lab as another option?
In some cases, yeah, we would have allowed that.
So that's a possible exception?
Yes.
So it was not that he positively did not have any home lab to go to?
Yeah, it was not a conclusive thing.
It was just somewhat uncertain and needed more discussion?
Yes.
Can I have a moment, Your Honor?
Yes.
Professor, that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do you have any redirect, Mr. Brockler?
I want to pick up where Miss Brady left off, Professor, and that is to be certain that the status of Mr. Holmes' academic career at CU was that he was going to be afforded the opportunity to do again those things at which he had struggled and not improved since the very beginning?
Yes.
There were a couple other things that Miss Brady had asked you about I want to talk to you about. Can we put up the defense exhibit that was the picture of the defendant with the orange hair in court? And I don't remember which number that is. I'm sorry.
It's 7. D-TR-7.
7. Could that be published again? You talked about this. Remember that, Professor?
Yes.
And you hadn't seen the defendant like this before?
No.
Do you know why he changed his hair color?
You mean his motivation for doing it?
Do you have any idea?
No.
Did he always appear to you when you met with him with glasses on?
No.
He didn't wear glasses at all, did he?
No.
So that's a change too, right?
Right.
How about facial hair?
I don't recollect him having facial hair.
Now, had you ever seen the defendant in court before this?
No.
Had you ever met with him after he tried to murder a theater full of people?
No.
Objection, Your Honor.
What's your objection? Overruled.
Go ahead, sir.
No.
Had you ever seen him sitting in a situation where he was utterly in fear for his future?
No.
Do you know who picked these specific expressions or mid-expressions to put into this picture?
No.
All right, that's all I have on that one. Thank you. Thank you.
Hey, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Judge. Sir, one of the questions you were asked by Miss Brady was if the defendant himself had ever affirmatively reached out to you for input or something. Do you remember that question?
Yes.
I want you to take a look at people's, I think it's TR 1200. And I want you to go to an email dated August 16th of 2011.
I believe it's the top email.
Oh, the top email.
Who's that an email from?
That's an email from James.
To you?
Yes.
Is he seeking something from you?
He asked whether he could rotate this upcoming fall quarter. So let me just read this. Will this upcoming fall quarter be a good time for me to rotate with you?
Is that something where he's exercising initiative to ask you about joining your lab?
Yeah, that email, yes.
And that didn't happen?
No.
Take a look at February 19th, 2012. That email there, who's that email from?
So that's an email from James.
To you?
To me.
What's he seeking in that email?
It says, when would be a convenient time for you in having a practice rotation talk?
He's reaching out to you to ask you to help him with...
That's a mandatory thing to do. So all students have to rehearse their rotation talks with their advisor.
And this is him not waiting on you, but him reaching out to you to set it up. Take a look at May 14th, 2012.
It's a similar email saying, when would you like to meet for a rotation pre-talk?
Again, him trying to get onto your schedule to do this, fair?
Yes.
Now, a couple of the other areas that Miss Brady talked to you about. She asked you about his, I guess, motivation perhaps to be in this program, and you had responded with, well, maybe it wasn't our particular program that he may have been interested in. Do you remember that exchange?
Yes.
Do you know whether or not the defendant had the year prior to applying to CU applied to and been rejected from more than half a dozen programs?
No.
Would that give you some indication that CU maybe wasn't his first choice?
Objection, speculation.
Sustained, pursuant to Rule 602.
Thank you, sir. And in terms of someone, we sort of touched on this, but Ms. Brady got into more detail with you. Those letters of recommendation from undergrad and those grades and his performance, you remember Ms. Brady talked to you about motivation and initiative and stuff like that? Is the level of motivation and initiative necessary to achieve good grades in undergrad different from the motivation and initiative needed to succeed in these laboratories?
Judge, I'm going to object to speculation because I think it would be different depending on the schools.
Overruled?
Could you repeat that question?
Yeah. The level of motivation and effort to get good grades in undergrad, is that a different kind of motivation and initiative that you need to show in the experiments in succeeding in these labs?
Yeah, in some ways it is, in the sense that the ability to succeed in undergrads is much more defined, whereas with research it's something that you're not sure what the outcome is going to be, even if you put in an effort. So it's less of an outcome dependent motivation, in the sense that you could work 10 hours a day and not get an experiment to work, but you still need to be motivated and self-driven to do those experiments. Whereas I know from my undergrad that if I put in 10 hours and study my course material, I'll do well in the exam.
Can I follow up with that?
Yeah.
For classroom setting, even here in this grad course, you get a syllabus. Is that fair?
Yes.
What's the purpose of that syllabus?
In the classroom setting is to sort of outline the elements of what the students need to know.
And maybe the materials you're supposed to read.
Yes.
And the lectures you're supposed to attend.
Yes.
There's nothing like that for these labs.
No.
Finally, sir, there were two other things that were missing from the defense exhibit that sort of captured otherwise the entire course of that first year of the grad program. Is that fair?
Yes.
One of them was the grant writing workshop. Was that not on there, or was that on there?
It was on the timeline, if that's what you're
Yes.
referring to. Yes.
Okay, that was on there. And that's, just to set up for the future, that's Professor Dan Tolan, who was part of that?
Yes.
And the second thing was, I'm sorry, I didn't write it down, the psychiatric basis?
Yeah,
or the...
so that was the biological basis of psychiatric and neurological disorders.
Okay, and all the things that were on that defense exhibit, this defendant successfully completed, other than the prelims?
Yes.
Nothing further, Your Honor. Thank you.
Any brief cross, Ms. Brady?
I just want to be sure, Professor,
Why don't you go to the microphone, please? Sorry. Thank you.
on Defense Exhibit 8, there was a box for the biological basis of psychiatric and neurological disorders. So there were not two things missing on that timeline, correct? Okay. And do you have any idea whether Mr. Holmes wore contacts when he attended school at CU?
No.
You testified regarding the emails that Mr. Holmes sent to you. He was required to set up those practice talks with you.
Yes.
Do you recall Mr. Holmes ever contacting you when it was not required to do so?
No.
Would you say it's fair to say it's more rare than not that people try and complete the program? They don't just drop out as soon as something gets hard.
Yes, it is a rare thing.
Thank you, Professor.
Professor, there may be some questions from the jury. In fact, it looks like there are quite a few. So I'm going to ask you to wait for just a moment, okay? Members of the jury, there are enough questions here that I think it makes sense to have you step out and stretch your legs and go on break for just a little bit. Please keep my advisements in mind during the break. Don't go too far. I'm hoping that we can get through these in about 10 minutes. I'm going to ask the professor to step out of the courtroom as well so we can discuss these outside his presence, okay? Go on break for about 10 minutes and then hopefully we'll come and get you at that point. Everyone may be seated, please. The record should reflect that the jury has left the courtroom now.
Hi, Joel. How are you?
Good.
Oh my God,
Whose fault is that? It's on at once.
Okay, the record should reflect that we are not only outside the presence of the jury, but also outside the presence of the witness. The jury has submitted a lot of questions for the witness, and so I'm going to run through these now and see if either side has any objection. The first question is on the form that I have marked as number 53. And the question is, do you know if the defendant took the elective course on psychiatric and neurology?
Yeah. Yeah. hungry. Just want some tennis. Yeah.
You know Puerto Rico have a bowling alley? I didn't know that.
Me neither.
This is the first time I hear it. I find that here, they say Puerto Rico have a bowling alley. In Villalba. Yes, it's a bowling place. Villalba.
Wait, what?
Villalba. Yes, bowling place.
Vijamba.
Yes.
Okay.
Puerto Rico. Villalba, Puerto Rico. I don't know if you did the same one. Jesus Christ, my father, my grandpa. They're talking about Puerto Rico, and they're talking about Puerto Rico, but I have no idea. So,
Yeah.
you know, they are from Puerto Rico, yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay, what did you say? Did you say anything?
Not much. We were watching the tennis. One of the matches got suspended because of impeding darkness, so the people couldn't see. So they're gonna have to do that match. So the remainder of that match tomorrow. It was Roger Federer and a Frenchman, Sanga. They're tied up at a set apiece, which means each person has one that's each one. Huh? Okay. Bye.
Thank you, Professor.
Professor, there may be some questions from the jury. In fact, it looks like there are quite a few. So I'm going to ask you to wait for just a moment, okay? Members of the jury, there are enough questions here that I think it makes sense to have you step out and stretch your legs and go on break for just a little bit. Please keep my advisements in mind during the break. Don't go too far. I'm hoping that we can get through these in about 10 minutes. I'm going to ask the professor to step out of the courtroom as well so we can discuss these outside his presence, okay? Go on break for about 10 minutes and then hopefully we'll come and get you at that point. may be seated, please. The record should reflect that the jury has left the courtroom now. Okay, the record should reflect that we are not only outside the presence of the jury, but also outside the presence of the witness. The jury has submitted a lot of questions for the witness, and so I'm going to run through these now and see if either side has any objection. The first question is on the form that I have marked as number 53, and the question is, do you know if the defendant took the elective course on psychiatric and neurological disorders? If so, what is the general content of that course? Any objection, Mr. Brockler? Ms. Brady, any objection?
Same response, if you know.
Okay, I'll emphasize if you know. Thank you. Next question is on the form that I have marked as number 54. The question is, what does it mean when Professor Delacroix says he's concerned by his experimental capabilities, if you know what he meant by that? Any objection, Mr. Brockler? Okay. Ms. Brady? Well, if he knows, it's hearsay. If he doesn't know, then it's speculation. So either way, I think it's an inadmissible question. So I will sustain the objection. It sounds like Dr. Delacroix or Professor Delacroix is going to address it anyway. So I will not ask this question. The next question is, was the school start date August 12, 2012, as stated by defense attorney and witness? And then the rest of the question says, on August 12, 2013, was early on the defendant's interrogation. I'm not sure what the rest of that means, but the question, I think, makes sense. Is there any objection to just the question, was the school start date August 12, 2012, as stated by the defense attorney and the witness? And I think I can just modify it to delete the last part of the question and just ask if the school start date was August 12, 2012. I'm assuming that he's going to correct that. All right, any objection? Then that, right after that, below that, it says on August 12, 2013. And then below that, in parentheses, it says was early in the defendant's interrogation, in parentheses. So I don't understand what the rest of that says. All right. The next question is on the form that I have marked as number 56. The question is, were the defendant's facial expressions in the picture consistent with what you've seen during one-on-one sessions? Eyes wide, tired. Mr. Brockler? Ms. Brady?
No objection.
Okay, next question is on the form that I have marked as number 57. Could you demonstrate the odd hand gestures and facial expressions that James made? Mr. Brockler? Ms. Brady?
No objection.
Okay. Next question is on the form that I have marked as number 58. Are candidates for the neuroscience program given expectations to include communication requirement prior to enrolling? If so, when and how are they given? Mr. Butler? Any objection?
No objection.
Thank you, Ms. Brady. Next is the form that I have marked as number 59. The first question is, in your opinion, can people who are introverted / socially awkward / quiet / reserved excel / succeed in the program at CU? Any objection? Any objection?
No.
The next question on the same form is, in your opinion, did the defendant not succeed at CU due to his introversion / lack of social awareness? Any objection? Any objection?
Judge, I worry that might be speculation. So I would object as speculative.
Well, this was his academic advisor, and this was his mentor. And so I think this calls for something that would be within his knowledge. I will emphasize that he cannot speculate, and he can only answer the question if he knows. Only if he has an opinion, I should say. That's based on observations. Next is the question, there is one question on the form that I have marked as number 60. You mentioned that the defendant being quiet, reserved, and socially awkward. Would you also have described him as disconnected at the time? And then in parentheses it says during the initial interview in 2011, end parentheses. Any objection? Any objection?
No.
Great. All right, let's bring the jury back, please. And let's bring the witness back as well, please. Okay, please be seated, everyone. The record should reflect that the jury has joined us again. Thank you for your patience, folks. Professor, the jury has submitted a lot of questions, and based on the rules of evidence and other applicable rules of law, I have determined that some of these questions are appropriate, and so I am going to ask them now.
Okay.
The first question is, do you know if the defendant took the elective course on psychiatric and neurological disorders? And if so, what is the general content of that course? And you should only answer the question if you actually know.
I don't exactly know whether he took the course and what the exact contents are.
Okay. The next question is, was the school start date August 12, 2012?
I'm not sure. I can't recollect the exact date.
The next question is, were the defendant's facial expressions in the picture consistent with what you've seen during one-on-one sessions, eyes wide and tired?
No.
The next question is, could you demonstrate the odd hand gestures and facial expressions that James made?
I think it essentially was what I had originally described as jerky movements that didn't go along with the rest of the body, and facial tilts and head expression, stretching of the scalp like that.
The next question is, are candidates for the neuroscience program given expectations to include communication requirement prior to enrolling, and if so, when and how are they given?
Could I have that question again?
Yes. Are candidates for the neuroscience program given expectations to include communication requirement prior to enrolling?
There are no communication requirements prior to enrolling.
The follow-up question was, if so, when and how are they given, but you're saying that there are no such requirements.
There are no official requirements for that.
The next question is, in your opinion, can people who are introverted, /socially awkward, /quiet, /reserved, excel, /succeed in the program at CU?
This is my opinion. Yes.
The next question is, in your opinion, did the defendant not succeed at CU due to his introversion / lack of social awareness? And you should only answer the question if you have an opinion that's based on your observations. In other words, you cannot speculate. So the question is, in your opinion, did the defendant not succeed at CU due to his introversion / lack of social awareness?
My personal opinion would be probably not.
And the last question, you mentioned the defendant being quiet, reserved, and socially awkward. Would you also have described him as disconnected at the time during the initial interview in 2011?
If somebody could define what disconnected really stands for. Disconnected from reality? Is that the question?
That's all the question states. So if you can't answer it, that's okay. All right. Are there any follow-up questions, Mr. Brockler, based on those questions from the jury?
With regards to the start time for the school, I think the question asked about 2012. Does it make any difference if we change the year and say August of 2011 as to when school started?
I don't know. The school start date sort of varies a bit in August. So, like this year, it's August 31st. So, I don't exactly remember what the start date for that particular year was.
Okay. With regard to the question about the picture that we put up there, and I'd asked you a couple, but I want to follow up on the one you got asked here. Had you ever seen the defendant in your office in those 10 meetings you described on no sleep?
Not that I know of.
There was a question that you sought some clarification on as to whether or not the defendant was disconnected during your interview. Do you remember that?
Yes.
So that I can follow up on that question. When he interviewed with you, was he responsive to your questions?
Yes.
Did he seem engaged enough to participate in the interview?
He did participate in the interview, yes.
Nothing else, Your Honor. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Brady, do you have any follow-up questions?
Just make sure it's clear, Professor, the school year that we're talking about with Mr. Holmes would have been from August 2011 into 2012.
Yes.
Okay, so if we said school started in August 2012, that would have been mistaken.
Right, right.
It was 2011 2012.
Yes.
And again, the question about being introverted or not interacting, that was a large criticism of Mr. Holmes in the lab, his lack of interaction.
Yes.
Okay, may this witness be released from his subpoena?
Yes, sir.
Is there any objection? All right, sir, thank you very much. You're released. All right, members of the jury, it's 3 minutes after 5, so it's quitting time. I gave you your admonishments earlier, and so I'm not going to repeat them again, but I will repeat again that they are extremely important, and that each and every one of them is mandatory, and each and every one of them applies to each and every one of you. So you must comply with all of them, please. Even if a single juror violates a single one of the advisements, it would create major problems for us. So we're trusting that you will do that. I know it takes a lot of discipline, but I have all the confidence in the world that each and every one of you will comply with all of my advisements. We have sort of an honor code, if you will, and we trust that you will do as I'm asking you to do. All right? Thank you, folks. Enjoy your evening, and we'll see you back here tomorrow morning at the usual time, 8:15. Thank you. Reflect that the jury has exited the courtroom now. Everyone may be seated. Is there anything we need to take up on behalf of the people at this time?
I got something really quick, Your Honor, just to request more than bringing something up.
Yes.
We've had a couple witnesses in referring to distances say, oh, it's like about as far away as that wall or the back corner or something like this. What I would like to do is I asked Detective Apple to bring out one of the 100-foot measuring things. I want to have him measure a couple of things, like from the witness stand to that corner in the back, maybe to that pillar, and then I might call and testify about, did you measure that? How far is that? Just so that we have a record of how far it is when people are actually talking about those things. Is that okay with the court?
It's okay with me. Let's see if the defense has any objection, Mr. King. No, yeah, I think that makes sense.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else, Mr. Orman? Oh, Ms. Tish McGuire has something.
And can he do that then when we're done with court tonight?
Yes.
Thank you.
Your Honor, just briefly, the court took argument the other day on victim impact evidence, and I don't really want to supplement that argument, but this morning at 5:17 a.m., we got an email from the defense with supplemental disclosures that they would like to use in the penalty phase. It was 13 photographs, 12 photographs of the defendant at various ages, and a map of some sort. People don't have any objection to those supplemental disclosures, but we would just like the court to consider, when the court's still considering whether or not to allow the prosecution to have those victim impact videos, that the defense today, 2 weeks into trial, is giving us new evidence that they intend to use in the penalty phase. So we just wanted to make that record. Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. Anything from defense, Ms. Brady? Go to the microphone, please.
Again, Your Honor, there's a difference between mitigation and a capital case in the confines and rules regarding victim impact. So what we submit as mitigation is not held to the same rules, the same standards, and the same requirements as victim impact. So I would note that the pictures we submitted are mitigation. They don't take any additional preparation. They can object to them if they think they're untimely, but I don't think that justifies victim impact coming in at this late date. We submitted 12 photographs. They submit videos with songs and stuff. So there are big differences.
Okay, anything else from the defense, Ms. Brady, at this time? All right. Okay, folks, have a good evening. I'll see you back here tomorrow morning. Thank you. The court will be in recess.
All right.